This video is brought to you by mybookie.ag. What's up guys, we are here for the UFC 292 card, headlined by Aljamain Sterling versus Sean O'Malley and Zhang Weili versus Amanda Lemos. This card took a massive hit. So many big fights got cancelled. We were supposed to see Henry Cejudo versus Marlon Vera. Cejudo got injured, so now Chito's fighting Munhoz. We were supposed to see Ra Font versus Song Yadong. The fight was completely cancelled, Song pulled out, and Ra fought Corey Sandhagen a couple weeks before. Jeff Neal was supposed to fight Ian Garry, but Jeff pulled out because of health issues, and now Neil Magny is fighting Ian Garry. And we were supposed to see Cody Garbrandt fight Mario Batista, but Cody got injured a few days ago, and now Mario Batista is going to go up against Damon Blackshear. So many great fights were supposed to happen, but we still got a pretty good card here. Aljamain Sterling versus Sean O'Malley is going to be the headliner. That did not get touched, thankfully. There's a lot of stakes on that main event because it is probably going to be Sterling's last fight in the bantamweight division if he wins, and he's going to go up to 145. If Sean O'Malley beats Sterling, now we finally get a real superstar as a champion in the stacked bantamweight division, and he would be dethroning the second most dominant champion right now in the UFC. Zhang Weili versus Amanda Lemos. This is a very exciting fight, a lot better than people think. Both fighters are so powerful. Amanda Lemos might be the only other fighter in the strawweight division that can outpunch Weili. Ian Garry is going up against Neil Magny. In my personal opinion, I like this Neil Magny fight better than Jeff Neal because I thought Jeff Neal was going to tear right through Ian Garry, but Neil Magny brings a sort of experience with a lot of output, a decent well-rounded game, enough to give Ian Garry some trouble. And it does bring that element of the young versus the old. Neil Magny's been around a lot longer than Jeff Neal has. Chito versus Pedro Munhoz is an excellent fight. It's a bit of a step down in competition for Chito from Corey Sandhagen, but Pedro Munhoz is the same guy that was making a pretty competitive fight with even Sean O'Malley. So we know the guy is still operating at a decent level, and I think a fight like this can bounce back Chito into where he needs to be as a legitimate top 5 threat to the champion. Chris Weidman's back after that horrific leg injury where his shin snapped against Uriah Hall, and early on the doctors were saying that Chris is probably never going to return to fighting. He is finally back and going up against another veteran in the middleweight division, Brad Tavares. It's a tough one for Chris. Gregory Rodriguez versus Dennis Tululin. I know Rodriguez is a huge favorite going into this. He's like a 4-1 favorite, and both guys are knockout artists, so we're going to see something exciting happen here. I think Gregory Rodriguez ultimately is just too powerful. I think he puts on the pressure a bit too much for Tululin, and I don't think he's going to be able to hang, especially in the second or third rounds if it gets that far with Rodriguez. In the first round, it could be a bit dicey, but I see Rodriguez being overall the more dangerous fighter out there, and if he takes him to the ground, if he judo tosses him or trips him out, Tululin's going to be in so much trouble on the ground. I think it's a good fight for Rodriguez. Austin Hubbard versus Kurt Holobaugh, the two finalists of The Ultimate Fighter. We've seen both these guys in the UFC before. Kurt especially did not do too well. In fact, he's lost every single UFC fight he was ever in, but it was against pretty steep competition. Thiago Moises, Shane Burgos, Raoni Barcelos. Back in 2013, he did lose to Steven Siler, but most of the UFC caliber fighters he went up against were actually pretty high level, trying his hand at both featherweight and lightweight, and it never went his way. Austin Hubbard had a much more successful career in the UFC. He's the same guy that retired Max Roskov, who had that big controversy in his corner, quitting after the second round, but he has at least won on the UFC level and didn't get finished every time. He went up against Davi Ramos for his UFC debut and went to a decision. That's a lot more impressive than what Kurt was able to do in his UFC career. But on The Ultimate Fighter, Kurt did look a lot better than Austin Hubbard. Austin had a very close fight with Roosevelt Roberts, went to a split decision. Some people felt like Roberts should have won, whereas Kurt finished both of his opponents, even TKOing Jason Knight. I do like Austin Hubbard overall, but I do expect a very competitive fight between the two. Andre Petrosky versus Gerald Mearshart. I think it's a fight where Gerald can shine. This is going to be relentless brawling from Petrosky versus the technique and skills of Gerald. Should be able to pick his shots pretty well on the feet, snipe him on the inside, straight punches beat looping, and even look for takedowns to absolutely take over this fight. I think it's a great one for Mearshart to win. Andrea Lee versus Natalia Silva should play out more like a grappler versus striker matchup. At least Andrea Lee should look at it this way, because Natalia Silva is a striker through and through. She has a traditional martial arts background. I'm pretty sure she's Taekwondo, at least she kicks like one. And she had one of the greatest knockouts, I believe, of last year, that spinning back kick to the face, and brings forward a threatening striking style for Andrea Lee, who's a lot slower, who doesn't hit as hard, not nearly as dynamic or athletic. It's going to be a tough one for Andrea Lee. She is a big underdog going into it, but I don't think she should be as counted out as she is, because she does have the grappling to make it dirty, roughen up Natalia Silva, and make the fight not as technical as possible, because the more technical and clean the fight looks, the better Silva is going to perform. And Andrea Lee does bring that kind of pressure. She is very tough and gritty. Her path is to get in there, make it as wild as possible, threaten with takedowns constantly, with also bringing a lot of output with her hands, mixing those up pretty well. But I do ultimately pick Natalia Silva to win this through a decision. I think she's going to cause a bit more damage. And I also do pick Corrine Silva to beat Marina Moroz, whose ground game I think is way too dangerous for Marina. Even though Marina Moroz has some good submission wins in her career, even 2 fights ago submitted Maria Agapova with an arm triangle choke, it does show the kind of squeeze that she's able to put on her opponents, but I think ultimately Corrina Silva's ground game is another level. Now, there's not a lot of prospects on this card. There's literally like 1 or 2. That makes the prospect of the night gonna have to be Natalia Silva. I know people will say, what about Ian Garry? Ian is ranked. If you're ranked, I can't see you as a prospect anymore. At that point, you're some sort of contender. Natalia Silva, on the other hand, is young, is promising, has a good striking skill set, very athletic, and I think she has a pretty bright future for that flyweight division. The fighter of the night, you could say it's O'Malley, but I'm going to go with Aljamain Sterling, because Aljamain is going on to be one of the greatest, if not the greatest bantamweight of all time. And with a win over Sean O'Malley, he's going to break the tie for most bantamweight title defenses in UFC history. Cruz does have more when you talk about WEC, but just in the UFC, Aljamain would break apart from Dominic Cruz with a win over Sean O'Malley. And on the pound for pound list, you would have to include him somewhere in the top 5, maybe even top 3. The stake of the night, the fighter that is in hot waters, has to be Chris Weidman. It's very sad, but Chris Weidman, coming off the injury, being 2-6 in his last 8 fights, puts him in a very detriment position. If he loses to Brad Tavares, there's probably no future for him in terms of being any sort of contender. And it might actually spell a retirement for his career. It might be too soon to say that, but you know, losing to Tavares after a really bad injury like that, I wouldn't be shocked if he retires after. The banger of the night, the most explosive, exciting fight on the card, is Gregory Rodriguez versus Dennis Talulin. Both fighters are knockout artists, not that technical, but really go forward with their attributes, trying to knock the opponent out any which way possible. The fight of the night, in my opinion, is Marlon Vera versus Pedro Munhoz. There's not a lot of competitive fights on this card, I think, but there might be a bit of back and forth between these two, given the fact that both guys are extremely durable, they both pack a lot of power, and I think the kicks between them two is going to cause a bit of a chess match. Both guys throw very good calf kicks. Pedro may be able to take some of the head kicks from Chito and return with some of his own shots as well, which is going to force both fighters to really pick out their shots, because any opportunity where they make a mistake, there is a lot of punishment that could come their way. So I don't see a lot of output in the fight, but everything that is thrown is an attempt to contribute a finish. And with that, let's go right to our first headlining fight, Chris Weidman versus Brad Tavares. As someone who's watched Chris Weidman ever since he made his UFC debut, way back in the day and went on that undefeated streak, beating all-time greats like Anderson Silva, Lyoto Machida, Vitor Belfort, he even defeated Damian Maia and Mark Munhoz in that run. People regard that run as one of the greatest in middleweight history, but then to see what happened to him with the Luke Rockhold loss and onward, it's a very sad flip of the page for Weidman's career, where so many people don't look at him like that anymore, and now he has to go up against guys like Brad Tavares. Nothing against Brad Tavares, he's always been a top 15, sometimes top 10 fighter, but Weidman was always looked at as like an all-time middleweight great, who struggles to get a win, even against much lesser competition. He is 39 years old, coming off a leg break. Everything is stacked against him. His chin is not the same anymore. Brad Tavares has legitimate power. He is faster than Weidman. He can blitz in there pretty quickly and get to Weidman's chin early. And there could be some hesitation from Weidman due to that injury. It can create some lapse in moments where Weidman is thinking a bit too much and Tavares just blitzes on him unexpectedly. But what I will say is, if Weidman returns in good form, I can see him using his wrestling to get to a decision win or even a late submission. We did see Omari Akhmedov take down Brad Tavares a couple times in their fight. And I think if Omari can do it, so can Weidman. Now, both those two fought each other before. Weidman beat Omari in a very close fight, and we saw that the wrestling between them were pretty close. But ultimately, my prediction for this fight, I am going to go with Brad Tavares. And I'm going to go by a first round TKO. I think there's going to be a bit of hesitation with the leg injury. I think off of that hesitation, Tavares is going to be able to land some big shots on Weidman, and I don't think Weidman can take too many. He's also been out for, 2.5 years? Whereas Tavares has been a bit more active, going up against guys like Bruno Silva, did get knocked out in the first round, and he even fought Dricus du Plessis, who was unknowingly to a lot of fans, and even to Brad, one of the best middleweights in the world. And he went the whole distance with that guy. And then we go to Marlon Vera versus Pedro Munhoz, the first fight on the main card. Like I said before, man, both fighters are extremely tough, have very good chins. Chito has a lot better defense. Munhoz kind of blocks everything with his head, and he's very confident in doing that. I don't know how confident he's going to be when Chito's shin comes his way, because Pedro's not that fast, right? He's a lot slower than Chito is, and he's shorter in every which way. He has a 65-inch reach. His legs are shorter. His height is shorter. I think he's going to be outgunned from a distance. I think there's going to be a bit of a clinic when it comes to distance striking, but if Munhoz is able to get his way in, he can land some pretty good shots in there, but he's going to have to probably eat some to deliver some. And shooting it for takedowns may be a good path for Munhoz to take. That's not something he usually goes to, but it is the best thing for him to mix it up a bit, because if he just tries to strike Chito from a distance, I don't think he's going to get much success. Chito is much faster with his footwork. His kicks are such a hard thing to handle. From the front kicks to the side kicks, he kicks to the legs very well. He digs into your body, throws good question mark kicks, even side kicks to the face that he showed against Rob Font. He has so many knockdowns off of his kicks. I wouldn't be surprised if he's the guy that puts Pedro down too, right? So he finished O'Malley off of the leg kick. He dropped Rob Font with head kicks. He knocked out Dominic Cruz with a round kick to the head. He knocked out Frankie Yeager with a front kick to the face. He has low output, but every single time he connects, he hurts you. It even showed in the Sean O'Malley fight on the ground. When he was on top of him, he actually knocked out O'Malley unconscious for a split second. He hit him with a hammer fist, and O'Malley got knocked out in a flash, which is something that's never happened to O'Malley against anybody else he fought. I mean, even Petr Yan bombed on O'Malley with that overhand, landing some big shots throughout that fight, and O'Malley was never out. He got dropped, but he was never out of it. With Chito, he was out of it after some ground and pound shots, tripping to the ground because of his leg injury. Chito has some outrageous power. It's just he has to put more output, and I think we're going to see a change in his style here. He lost to Corey Sandhagen because he just didn't do anything. He had no output and he got smothered. We know Chito comes back from losses better. He's done it every single time. Every time he's lost, he's come back in better form and addressed the reason why he lost. And I think it's going to be a similar thing this time because he isn't that old in age. Pedro is older, not only 6 years in actual age, but they have a similar amount of fights. Both been in the UFC for a while and fought the best. I would argue Pedro's taken more damage than Marlon as well. Marlon hasn't taken that much damage in his career. He's still young enough, probably right now in his prime, to make those adjustments and come out a better fighter, to throw out more output and be more threatening in front of his opponent. Not everything has to come from one big shot, especially if it's a 3-round fight. He doesn't have much time to work with here, and he cannot give up rounds to someone like Munhoz. So I think we're going to see that change out of Chito, and I ultimately am going to pick him to win this fight. I think the long-range strikes overall are going to do Pedro in. I think it's going to be very hard for Pedro to come in from a distance and land something meaningful if it's not set up off of takedowns. He can throw out some calf kicks and catch Chito unexpectedly here and there, but Chito has a 6-inch reach advantage. He has much longer legs. He's much faster. He's better at distance work overall. He throws so many different kind of techniques with his kicks, and he has an excellent jab and counter left hook. Pedro just swings pretty wild. He has a lot of haymakers, a lot of big hooks, and Chito's striking defense is so good. I think it's going to be hard for Pedro to catch him clean with any of those shots. So I'm going to see Chito winning this fight, and I'm going to go by a decision win. Pedro's a bit too tough to knock out, but if someone could do it, it probably is Chito. And then we go to Neil Magny versus Ian Garry. The old versus the new. 11 years difference is pretty crazy. And Neil Magny has over 3 times the fights professionally. Talk about a difference in experience. And we know Ian Garry was preparing for Jeff Neal, who fights very differently than Neil Magny. Jeff Neal fights more like a boxer with good head kicks and decent takedown defense, but engages you with fast hands to try to knock you out. Neil Magny's a bit more well-rounded, where he'll throw a bit of everything with not much power. He smothers you with output and pressure, tries to take you to the ground, drag you into deep waters, and make you suffer out there with a pestering of shots all over the place. He has an incredibly long reach. They are the same height, both 6'3", which is crazy for welterweight, but Neil Magny has that 6-inch reach advantage, which is significant. That is enormous. Ian Garry's reach is actually shorter than his own height, but Ian Garry's more of a sniper. He tries a lot of things out there to see what works, but he ultimately tries to snipe you with the right hand. He likes to move back and counter you with it. His head kick against Daniel Rodriguez was excellent. The guy has incredible precision, but his defense is not all there. His head is there to be hit. He doesn't put up a guard. He likes to move his feet more than anything, take off angles or move back on your punches and stuff. It's going to be harder for him to move back and counter because Magny has that 80-inch reach. And the thing is, Magny does not throw power punches. So if you're making these big movements, to get away from his punches, you're making big movements against small attacks, which is what you don't want to do. You usually want to make big movements against big strikes, not big movements against small strikes, because a lot of those are setups and they can be added on to each other. So if Garry back steps away from a jab, here comes another jab behind it that he's going to walk right into looking for his counter. So we know Magny's going to be pumping a lot of jabs out there, trying to smother Ian Garry and then get into the clinch, land big knees and elbows in there, trying to trip him out and make the fight miserable for him. And it's ultimately why I actually don't think Magny should be as big of an underdog as he is. I know he's taking this on short notice, but the guy's always in shape. He's always training, always ready for a short notice replacement. Neil Magny's kind of like an RDA where he's willing to fight anybody. And when you have that sort of mentality, you're also always going to be on cue, ready for any kind of notice to fight. Now, where I see Ian Garry having a big advantage is pushing Neil Magny back off of feints and jabs. This is going to be a big thing for Ian Garry, because Magny really is not threatening at all on the back foot. He doesn't really do too much. He tries to clinch up with you and that's pretty much it. And I think Ian Garry has good enough footwork to backstep away from some of that, counter him with the right hand, or at least present it to threaten Magny backwards to the fence. And I think from there he can kind of stalk him, look for things off of the jab and feints for the right hand or the right kick. I think calf kick's going to be big for Ian Garry too, and it's ultimately why I'm going to pick him to win this fight. I'm going to go with Ian Garry, and I'm going to go by a third round TKO. I think it's a closer fight than the odds are giving it, because Ian Garry's a 5-1 favorite, and Magny has a sort of experience and pressure that can give snipers like Ian Garry some trouble. So sometimes the answer to a sniper style is to smother them with output so they have nothing to snipe at. It's very similar to like Corey Sandhagen, what he did against Marlon Vera in a way. Ian Garry has more output than Vera, but that style to just throw a bunch of stuff at a sniper, they don't know what to pick at. Right? They don't know what to target. You overload the data and then they get a bit wild with their own punches. It could cause the fight to be dirtier than they wanted. So that's why I could see Neil Magny giving Ian Garry a bit of trouble here. But ultimately, I'm going to go with Ian Garry. If he gasses out, that's going to be really tough for him. But credit to Neil Magny for taking this fight and being willing to fight anybody. And then we go to the co-main event. Zhang Weili versus Amanda Lemos. I am super excited about this fight. There's going to be a lot of power punches and kicks coming out in this fight. And for the first time, well, maybe the second time. Rose Namajunas is kind of similar with Zhang Weili when it came to power, but this may be the first time Zhang Weili may be clearly overpowered by her opponent. Lemos punches like a dude. It's just what it is. There's nobody in that weight class that throws punches like her. She is so dangerous with her striking. Not only her punches, but even her kicks. There are some body kicks that she threw against Waterson or Waterson Gomez or whatever. They were pretty scary, man. She has a strong base, good stance. It's just the only thing, she's a bit flat-footed, and I think Zhang Weili can maneuver her way around her and find openings for takedowns. That's where I think ultimately the biggest difference of the fight is going to be on the wrestling. Not strike too much with Lemos, but make it an MMA match. Mix up everything. Lemos also has a little bit of a reach advantage, and she throws her punches a lot longer. Weili doesn't extend her punches all the way sometimes, and it was one reason as to why Rose was able to beat her in exchanges. Amanda Lemos throws everything she has, full extension into her punches, with also a good extension on her jab to create some early respect. And what was pretty concerning was to see that Michelle Waterson took down Lemos pretty easily in that first round of their fight. I think Weili is going to be strong enough to keep her on the ground, whereas Waterson is a bit small for the weight class, so it's going to be different in that one. I think if Weili gets Lemos down, Lemos going to have a hard time of getting up. If she keeps getting up, I mean, this fight is going to be a lot more competitive than I even originally thought. I think Weili should be able to keep Lemos on the ground, try to chase submissions, land good ground and pound shots, and that's her path to win this fight. Mix up the boxing with the wrestling, throw out some good kicks for feelers, and win the fight through that. Lemos' way of winning this fight, move back on the takedowns, and use long range as the foundation for everything. Not only to defend takedowns moving away from those, but also keep Zhang Weili at the end of your punches. Pump out a lot of good jabs, but don't commit too much on the right. There has to be a lot more feints to draw out those takedowns, or draw out some counter punches from Zhang Weili and then use that to counter for yourself. I think Lemos can hurt Zhang Weili with her punches, and I think she just has to find those at correct moments off of feints and keep her at the end of the punches at all times. We do know Zhang Weili sometimes gets into brawls. That would be a bit of a 50-50 for both fighters, as Lemos does not have a lot of output. She has crazy power and can knock Zhang Weili out, but a lot of times she likes to just pinpoint with one, whereas Zhang Weili likes to put together combinations. So ultimately, my prediction for this fight, I am going to go with Zhang Weili. It's a Scary one for her, man. It's really scary, but I think her wrestling is going to pull through in this one. I also believe that Amanda Lemos may not be ready for 5 rounds. I believe she may be way too explosive, and the exchanges that Weili is going to force on her is going to cause her to keep exploding, and I think it's going to start gassing her out. So I see Zhang Weili winning this fight by a 4th round TKO. And then we go to the main event. Aljamain Sterling versus Sean O'Malley. Another seemingly grappler versus striker matchup, even though both guys can do a bit of everything. O'Malley's Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is a bit underestimated, and so is Aljamain's striking. Aljo has awkward striking that he makes work. His punches and kicks come from weird angles, he has a lot of output, he puts on a lot of pressure on you, it gets his opponent thinking about the takedowns and then gets them caught by strikes, and then when they think strikes are going to come, then he shoots it on you. And I think ultimately the grappling difference is going to be massive. Even though O'Malley is better than people think, he's just nowhere near the level of Sterling. Sterling's grappling is just so high level. He may be the best grappler ever in the bantamweight division. He has a good ability to get your back, he's so physically strong, he's way bigger than O'Malley. Sterling's 16 pounds heavier walking around, and he looks like it too. He's massive for the weight class, and it's a reason why he wants to jump up to 145. I mean, the fact that he's walking around at 170, I think he's a pretty good size featherweight. Just a little bit on the short side these days. So I'll say, man, if Aljo gets the fight down, the fight is pretty much over. But if there's someone who can knock Aljo out, it is someone like Sean O'Malley, who has a clear range advantage. Not only does he have a 1-inch reach advantage, which is not that significant, but he is taller and he fights from long range better than almost anybody else in that weight class. He's a sniper, so he has that one punch potential. He can find Aljo's chin with one punch better than anybody else, but that also does backfire on him. If he misses that single punch, he's probably getting taken to the ground. It's because he sits on everything, right? Whenever O'Malley throws, he sits on it. He plants right in front of you when he throws it. And if he misses that, he's open for a takedown, he's going to be overextended, and I think it's going to come pretty easy for Aljo, who even doesn't need to get the fight on the ground. He just needs to get you off balance and he can get your back. And that's pretty much how the fight will play out. O'Malley's going to be moving a lot, he's going to throw a lot of feints, put out some jabs and leg kicks here and there. Nothing too big. He will only commit when he finds the shot. Either he creates the opening, which is a lot less likely to happen than if Aljo gets aggressive. Once he gets aggressive, I think O'Malley is going to fire out that big shot, and then everything gets figured out from there. The whole story of the fight is going to happen once that exchange happens. When O'Malley is getting pressured, and he throws that big shot to knock Aljo out, how does Aljo respond? Does he evade it and get to the hips? If that happens, Aljo wins the fight. If O'Malley lands the shot, he probably wins the fight. So that is pretty interesting. The fight can end in one exchange. And ultimately, my prediction for this fight, I am going to go with Aljamain Sterling. I think his wrestling's too much. I think he's too strong. If he grabs a hold of Sean O'Malley, I think he's going to get him to the ground or get his back or get some kind of submission. And even on the feet, Aljamain is not reckless. Shown in his Corey Sandhagen fight, when he put that pressure on him, he never got reckless. He even defended Corey's counters while being more aggressive than I've ever seen him. And that's against a guy who has the same kind of stature, same height and length as Sean O'Malley, who also is great at distance too. And that was Aljo before. That was not this Aljamain Sterling. So I'm going to go with Aljamain Sterling. I'm going to go by a 1st round submission. I think Aljo's going to have to put the pressure on O'Malley, but intelligently. I know he's talking about like trying to finish O'Malley with ground and pound and stuff. He can do that too, but I don't know if he wants to risk it, man. But I ultimately do think Aljo will win. If he wins, I will deem him as the greatest bantamweight of all time. And he's going to go up to featherweight, potentially fight Alexander Volkanovski. And as you could see, my bookie does have Aljamain Sterling as a big favorite, but I'm holding him as a bigger favorite than they're even showing. And if you want to capitalize on these odds, make sure to go to mybookie.ag where they have the best lines in the business. The Aljamain Sterling and Sean O'Malley fight specifically is one where a lot of people do believe that O'Malley is just not on the level of Aljo. And if you look at the methods of victory there, Aljamain to win by a knockout, most likely going to be ground and pound, not on the feet. That's a plus 500, and him to win by a submission is much less. O'Malley to win by knockout, which is the way he would win if he does pull it off, is a plus 300. So if you are going to go with O'Malley, it's probably better to go with the method of victory instead of picking him altogether. To see him win by a decision or submission is pretty tough. He's never been 5 rounds before. It's going to be hard for him to win rounds against someone like Aljo, and he's going to be looking to knock the guy out either way. Zhang Weili versus Amanda Lemos. They have Weili as a big favorite. I have her a bit less than that. I think Lemos has a real chance of winning this, but as you can see here, Weili to win by knockout is pretty small. Lemos to win by knockout is a plus 450, but don't overlook Lemos to win by a submission because her guillotines are pretty nasty, and there is a way where she can drop Weili and jump on a submission, which is a way that a lot of strawweights win their fights if they finish them. Magny, huge underdog. I think he's way too big of an underdog against Garry. He definitely has a chance to win this, but the odds are pretty much showing that he has no chance of winning, which I honestly do not agree with. And we look at the methods for Chito versus Pedro. Chito to win by a decision is probably the way it would end. Him knocking out Pedro Munhoz would be pretty crazy, and he doesn't usually go for submissions. Outpointing Pedro Munhoz to a decision is probably the likely way he would win this. In my locks of the card, the fighters I believe are the best to bet on are Aljamain Sterling, Marlon Vera, Gregory Rodriguez, and maybe Gerald Mearshart. The underdogs on the card, I think Mearshart's the best underdog on the card, and I am not writing out Magny. And when you go to my bookie, they are giving you that offer where for your first deposit, they'll double it all the way up to $1,000. So if you put 10 down, they'll give you another 10. If you put in 500, they'll give you another 500. It is going to come with that general rollback withdrawal requirement that most have. And in order to activate this offer, make sure to use the promo code WEASEL, that's WEASLE, to take advantage of MyBookie's sign-up offer. Remember to visit mybookie.ag today where you could win big. And that's ultimately the end of the predictions, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and if you did, make sure to give this a thumbs up. If you enjoyed my content, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.